Hello there, so welcome to the second part of my building a computer video. So in my previous video I showed you a number of the parts that had arrived, the purpose of the computer that I was building, and my plans for the future parts that I was hoping to buy and receive before Christmas. Well, we'll see. Some of those parts have arrived. There's been a bit of a development with some of the other bits, specifically the AMD graphics card. We'll talk about that later, but in this video I'm going to show you the things that arrived and actually put the computer together. I mean, I've done it before and I still had to do a fair amount of research so that I didn't make mistakes, and there are a few things that I did in this video incorrectly that I want you to learn from so you don't make the same mistakes yourself. But anyway, let's get on with the video. So yes, I'm trying to build a gaming PC for about £1,500. I want it to have the latest AMD processor and the latest AMD graphics card. Yeah, we'll see about that. Anyway, the way I left it last time was I had all the kind of basic things for the computer. I was missing the brains, the motherboard, the processor, and the graphics card. Well, I had ordered in that video a 5800X AMD processor bundle from Scan for about £700, and I was having second thoughts, to be honest. I'd looked at some of the reviews online and it's not the best value for money processor. It's better than the 5600X, which is the slightly lower model, but you're paying £150 more than that for a little bit more, for a kind of incremental improvement, whereas for an extra £100, so nearly £800, you can get a much better processor with 50% more cores and a faster clock speed and more cache, and these are all things that will make the processor faster. So I changed my order. The waiting lists for that were terrible because yes, AMD, despite moaning about Nvidia and laughing at their supply issues with their 3000 series graphics cards, they've had exactly the same problems themselves. So I joined a queue of people, and I don't know if it's because I'm a famous YouTube celebrity or actually because there was maybe an administrative cock-up, and I think this happens a lot. I have actually received my 5900X processor already. So that arrived from Scan Computing in this box. Yes, it is a motherboard bundle, so it actually comes with 16 gigs of bloody RGB RAM. Don't know why I did that. I'm always doing that these days. I don't want the glowing RAM, and it's not enough RAM for me personally, and RAM is cheap these days, so I'm going to take that RAM out and replace it with 32 gigs of normal non-flashing RAM. You can see there's what's called a Wraith cooler on there, an air cooling thing. It might be alright, but actually even on the Scan website they advise you to change it to a proper cooling system, so I'm going to be taking that off. So essentially what I wanted this for was the motherboard and the processor. Doesn't it look nice? Everything's black these days. When I started building computers, everything was kind of a sort of weird yellowy colour, and then it went green, and then it went blue, and now it's black. So anyway, let's put this computer together. So here is the Corsair Carbide SPEC 5 case. It is just a normal mid-tower case. I could have got a bigger tower, but I fancied something a little bit sort of smaller. The mini ATX cases are really tiny and you're very limited with the motherboards you can fit in those. And you can see it's got a Perspex panel on the side which is covered in a sort of cling wrap thing so it doesn't get scratched. Oh, that's nice of Corsair, isn't it? We've got a number of things on the top panel: USB slots, headphone jack, microphone jack, reset switch and power button. And on the back here you can see it comes with a little Allen key, so that's functional, isn't it? You can use that for putting your IKEA furniture up, or taking the Perspex panel off the front of the case. You can see this case actually does come with a Corsair, I think it's 120mm fan that's got LED lights in it, red LED lights. Didn't really want red LED lights, but these days it's almost impossible to build a computer that hasn't got something flashing in it. You can see there's a little bit of a bulge on the other side. That's because these days there's a tendency to cable manage, so bung a load of cables behind your motherboard out of sight, so that when you look in the computer, it looks really clean and tidy. So you use the little Allen key to remove these kind of bolty things holding on the Perspex panel. It doesn't feel as sturdy as I expected. I've got a very old, creamy beige computer case from 20 years ago, and I'm pretty sure that thing could withstand a nuclear bomb. This feels a little bit more flimsy. There's space in this for loads of fans and also for a water cooling system, which I am going to install. But if you want to install a big water cooling system, a 240mm radiator system, you can only put that in one place on this computer, at the front on the bottom. Building this computer and researching all the individual things that I was unsure about, what I've learned is kind of more than ever before, the internet is full of conflicting advice, and literally to the point that you've got one person saying if you do that you'll destroy your computer, to another person saying I've done that and it's the best way of doing it. But if you really want to optimize your computer, you're going to have to try these things yourself. So you can see this case will take an ATX or a micro ATX motherboard, and there are actually already pre-installed the little spaces that your motherboard rests on, which is great because I was a little bit worried about where to put those, so it's a little bit of a relief that they are pre-installed. There is also a hard disk caddy here, which you can put sort of SSDs in, as well as the old traditional awful spinning discs. Not sure why anybody buys those these days. They're noisy and they're slow. I'm going to be taking this caddy out because I need to put my cooling radiator in there. And part of this sort of cable management thing, there's a sort of bulgy thing at the back here with lots of cables running down it from the computer case, so that everything looks clean and tidy from the front, even though it's a rat's nest. At the back there are feet and also dust filters as well, because you don't want dust getting in your computer. Nobody likes dust. We've also got cable ties and screws. Cable ties for, again, cable management. So let's start by putting the PSU in the case, and I went for the, as I said, the RM750X. So I took that out of the box. Wow, it doesn't half smell nice. None of the cables come pre-attached to the power supply. You only plug in the ones you want, which again is good for cable management. These days power supplies are in the bottom of the case. Not sure why. Maybe is it a cooling thing? Perhaps you can let me know. There are screw holes here for attaching it to your case. So I started to screw these things in, and a word of advice, I'm actually screwing this into the wrong hole, and you don't want to do that. I'm screwing this into one of the little air vent holes, which is dangerous. Look and make certain that you are screwing into the correct screw holes in your power supply, and use the screws that are supplied. Don't use long screws or you will go through and hit a component. Luckily, because I was using the screws that came with it, even though I screwed into the wrong hole, I only sort of chipped a little kind of metal edging thing inside the PSU, so it wasn't a problem. And then it's just a case of positioning the motherboard on the screw holes in the case, which is really very easy when you've got a computer of this size, and then use again the supplied screws to screw the motherboard, and not super tightly because you don't want to crack the motherboard. It just wants to be secure and not wobble around. Here you can see my beautiful Ryzen 9 processor. Thank you, computer gods. I used a little tiny drop of isopropyl alcohol on a bit of kitchen towel to wipe off the thermal paste from the Wraith cooler that was pre-attached to this. Took me about 5 minutes to remove that Wraith cooler, because even once you've unscrewed the clips from it, which incidentally sounds like you're wrenching the life out of the computer, it sounds terrible, it's still then stuck because obviously the thermal paste sticks it to the processor. But a slight twisting motion and eventually it loosened and just lifted off, and I was left with this under thermal paste mess. Now we've got to attach the power supply to the motherboard, and we've got the CPU power. Generally you just want to plug in the 8-pin one. If you just plug in the 4-pin one, you're not going to have enough power and your computer's going to shut down. So for most people the 8 will be enough. We've got the HD audio header from the front of the computer case. We've got the power switch and LEDs and things. This was a little bit of a hassle. Some of them are labelled, like the plus and minus for the power LED were labelled, both on the actual clips themselves and the pins on the motherboard. For other ones, I had to look in the manual. I don't think it causes a problem if you get them the wrong way round, it just won't work. My tiny bit of advice is that the black cable is usually ground, and in the manuals it will tell you which pin is ground, so you can kind of work it out from that. But a 24 pin power cable for the motherboard, there's a sort of peripheral power cable and PCI Express as well. If you've got a graphics card that's got two 8-pin connectors on it, you need to use two separate cables from your power supply. If you've got one of these new graphics cards that requires a lot of power, don't think you can supply that from one cable, because you probably can't. Here I plugged in this damn USB 3 thing. I did actually rip this connector off the board when I tried to remove it again, and thankfully I got it on again. These are a little bit renowned for their difficulty to remove. It's a very stupid design. I'm still not sure how you remove it. I've read there are different ways of rocking the cable to get it out, but only plug it in when you're sure you're not going to have to remove it again. So powering everything is just plugging things into the power supply and then routing them to the correct place on the board through the holes in the case. So the next stage is to install my hard drive, and I didn't mention this in the previous video, but I do already have a solid state drive that was sent to me by Kingston not that long ago. There are probably better ones now, and my personal research since then has found that it's not superb value for money, but certainly for my purposes, a little bit of video editing and some gaming, I hope it will be enough. If it's not, I can replace it at a later date. Solid state drives are so small that they can actually be mounted on the back of the case. So here you can see I've put in one screw and I'm able to screw it into place. So we can plug in the data transfer cable, and we can also plug in a power cable as well. So now I need to install my graphics card, which is a good time to mention my intended graphics card for this computer, which is the AMD 6800 XT, which is their brand new graphics card, which was meant to cost about $650, which people estimated might be, you know, £550 here in the UK. Well, it was launched on Wednesday, and at exactly 2 o'clock, I tried to buy it from a load of different websites on the internet, and like a lot of you, I failed dismally. The only people who've got this graphics card are a handful, and I mean literally a handful of very lucky people who managed to get in the queue at the right time, and I don't necessarily mean first in the queue. And of course, all the YouTubers who've been sent them for free. In this country, companies like PC World didn't even bother to list them because they had so few, or maybe even none. I was on scan.co.uk. I got rejected for being a bot at one stage because I tried to load a page a couple of times. Really frustrating. To cut a long story short, I haven't got the graphics card, and now I'm not sure what to do. And I'll make another video on this in future, but I'm gonna wait. I'm not paying extortionate prices, because that's the other thing. Everyone's put the prices up. Overclockers are taking the biscuit, to put it politely. They're charging something like 680 quid to pre-order that graphics card. For that money, you can virtually get a 3080. So you're better off getting that because it's a better graphics card. So I'm going to buy something else in the meantime, at least, and wait until these things become available. I'm probably going to get an AMD 5700 XT, which I reckon I can get for under 300 quid, and the performance will be sufficient for what I want. Probably. So I've got an old graphics card, a 750 Ti by Nvidia, which I'm going to install, and I struggled with this, to be honest. Turns out there is a little panel on the back of the case that you have to unscrew first before you can install a card. So I was just trying to sort of jam it in like I used to, and so here I've installed the graphics card. You can see it still looks pretty good, even though it's actually incredibly outdated. It'd be interesting to see how it performs. We'll look at that in a future video. In preparation to install the cooling radiator, I removed the hard drive caddy, which I was able to do by removing some screws on the bottom of the computer case. And here I've taken the front cover off the computer because I'm going to need to remove the fan that's there to fit in this radiator. So basically ripped the front of the computer off. That made a deathly sound, I can tell you, but actually it's just clips. So, you know, you pull it and it comes off. It's no big deal, really. In my previous video, I showed you that I'd actually bought an H60 cooling system by Corsair. I decided not to use that in the end. It's a single small, like 140mm radiator with a 120mm fan. I'm not convinced that that is sufficient because apparently they pull more power than AMD kind of claim, and why risk it? So I've sent that back and I actually ordered a 100i Corsair cooling system, which unfortunately has got more kind of RGB stuff on it. But anyway, in order to attach it to the processor, I had to do some things. So firstly, you may have noticed in my previous sections there that the backing plate was missing from the processor. So I had to reinstall that, and in the box that the motherboard came with, there were these kind of mount things that is what your cooler will clip to. So I had to reattach those with the screws that were provided. This case will only fit a 240mm radiator maximum at the front of the case with 120mm fans. There is actually thermal paste pre-installed on it. The radiator is going to go at the front of the case. A little bit of an unorthodox cooling configuration here. Essentially, I'm setting this up such that cool air comes in at the front bottom of my computer, goes through the radiator, obviously hot air rises, and it's going to go up in the case and out through the back. So there's a 120mm exhaust fan at the back of the computer. If I wanted more exhaust fans, I could stick them on the top. This configuration, I understand, will cool the processor quite a lot, but maybe might leave the graphics card being a bit hotter. Ideally, you might have this radiator at the top of the case as an exhaust. That would cool the inside of the case and the graphics card, but your processor would run a little bit hotter. There are different schools of thought for which is a better approach. Do your own research. Getting the old pump installed on the processor was a little bit of a challenge, hooking those things around the clips on the motherboard, and at one stage, you know, all the thermal paste was all over the processor because I sort of positioned it a bit. But eventually I got it on, and now the computer is actually ready to test, believe it or not. It's taken enough time, hasn't it? This is the video footage of me testing it. So you obviously have to power up the PSU, and then you do get the motherboard lights come on even before you've turned the computer on. So have I got all these cables in the right place? Or have I shorted something? Have I broken the PSU when I screwed into the wrong hole? What is the outcome? Well, let's press the power button. It's all powered up. Doesn't it look like a fun fair? A really gaudy fun fair? Yes, it does. I think it's working, but no signal. So it's not working. And at this point, you know, my dad is helpfully suggesting to me, maybe the CPU's broken. Yeah, cheers, Dad. Looking at the motherboard error codes, which are little LED lights, it was a VGA error. And so I took the graphics card out and tried to use the onboard graphics. It didn't work. Plugged the graphics card back in again, so essentially reseated it, and it started working. Up came Windows, and lots of reinstalling of drivers and things. So it is actually working. I've changed the RAM over now. I've reinstalled Windows. I've done a little cheeky benchmark, but I'm going to save that for a future video to show you how different graphics cards compare in this computer and in different games. If you've got any questions about this build, please let me know. Do check out my previous video if you haven't seen it, which talks a little bit more about why I'm buying this computer. Anyway, thank you to my loyal Patreons. For just a few dollars a month, they get early access to all of my videos, which is pretty good. George Foot and Magnanimous Meg give me very generous donations, and as a result, I'm extra nice to them. Hope you enjoyed this video. Do subscribe, and I shall see you next time for another one.